Welcome to the debate. Today we are asking a pretty difficult question.
We are indeed.
When someone wraps themselves in spiritual language, and calls themselves a goddess, a shaman, or an empath, are they actually pursuing enlightenment, or are they just putting on impenetrable armor so they never have to apologize for their behavior again?
It is a question that cuts right to the core of modern spirituality, and honestly, human psychology too.
Exactly. I mean, if you walk through a museum of antiquities and you look at the ancient armor, right? The bronze breastplates, the heavy medieval chainmail, you understand exactly what it was built for.
Right, it was forged for the battlefield.
Yeah, it was designed with a very specific purpose, to repel a lethal blow and keep the wearer alive under extreme duress.
It has a very clear binary utility. I mean, it is meant to keep you physically intact when someone is actively swinging a weapon at you.
But imagine walking out of that museum, going to your local coffee shop, and seeing someone wearing that exact same full suit of medieval armor just to order a latte.
Oh, that's quite an image.
Right? And when they accidentally bump into you and spill your coffee, instead of apologizing, they just let your complaint bounce right off the breastplate.
Mm-hmm.
They look at you as if your spilled coffee and, in fact, your entire existence is completely irrelevant to their grand armored life. That scenario perfectly captures the essence of what we are examining today, a phenomenon known as the sacred alibi.
It really does. It is a fascinating and, frankly, a pretty disturbing behavioral pattern.
Yeah.
We are talking about individuals across various traditions who take the names of deities, the fluent language of the divine, and wear them exactly like that armor.
Out in public.
Right. It is worn over the chest facing outward. So any valid criticism, any interpersonal friction aimed at the person underneath, well, it appears to them to be an attack on the sacred itself.
And that brings us to the central debate we are exploring today. Are we looking at a defensive mechanism here? Like, is the sacred alibi born out of a universal, almost tragic human vulnerability?
You mean the fear of being ordinary?
Specifically that, yes. The profound fear of being ordinary and being wrong. Because I will be arguing that fear and vulnerability are the absolute root of this behavior. I see the sacred alibi as a defensive shield.
A shield?
Yes, people use it to avoid the painful, unglamorous labor of real personal growth. They are terrified, and the armor is how they survive that terror.
Well, I will be arguing that we cannot let them off the hook by just calling them afraid. I mean, I understand the empathy, but this behavior is deeply narcissistic.
Narcissistic?
Absolutely. It functions as a sword of weaponized ignorance that the practitioner uses to elevate themselves, maintain power, and do so at the direct expense of everyone around them.
Okay, well, let me start by laying out my perspective on this, and I want to ground it in the actual psychology of the people who do this.
Go ahead.
If we look closely at what is driving this performance, what we find underneath is it's more often fear than malice. There are three very specific, very human fears at play here.
Which are?
First, the fear of turning out to be completely ordinary. Second, the fear of being wrong in front of witnesses. And third, perhaps the most tragic one, the fear that whatever is under all that spiritual performance might not actually be enough to be loved on its own terms.
I mean, those are very real human fears. I will grant you that.
Right? And claiming a god's name or adopting a grandiose spiritual title is essentially a fast track to feeling large.
It is a shortcut.
Exactly. The alternative is the slow, patient, highly uncertain work of actually becoming a trustworthy person. That feels way too risky to them. So they reach for the shield.
But you are ignoring the fallout of that reach.
Wait, let me just finish this thought. This is a universal human vulnerability. Anyone who has ever been losing an argument and suddenly reached for something larger than themselves, a grand philosophical principle, a sudden moral high ground, just to feel more solid in that moment.
We've all done that.
We have. Everyone has felt the gravitational pull of this shield. It is a defense mechanism against the terror of inadequacy. It is not some malicious, calculated plot to subjugate the people around them.
I come at it from a completely different way. I mean, I get the empathy in your approach, I really do. But by focusing so heavily on their internal vulnerability, we are ignoring the external reality of their behavior.
How so?
Yes, fear might be the seed, but the tree that grows out of it is a self-centeredness so complete that other people quietly stop registering to them as fully real. You mentioned the shields, but you were leaving out the sword.
Where is the sword in someone just trying to protect their own fragile ego? I don't see it.
Well, the sword rarely looks like a traditional weapon. It looks like a boundary crossed by someone who felt utterly entitled to whatever was on the other side of it.
Okay.
When a person uses borrowed, unquestionable authority to deliver an opinion with the total confidence of Scripture, they are not just protecting themselves, they are dominating the space.
I think dominating is a strong word.
Is it? Think about their complete refusal to apologize. Apologizing would mean admitting the shields was necessary, which means admitting they are just a regular, flawed human.
Right, which goes back to their fear of being ordinary.
But by refusing to ever be wrong, they are making an active, offensive choice to maintain a hierarchy. They are divine and everyone else is subordinate. That is not just defense, that is conquest.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. To really understand why they refuse to apologize, we have to understand the specific nature of their ignorance.
Ignorance?
Yes, the ignorance of the sacred alibi is fundamentally an avoidance of what we might call shadow work.
Meaning what exactly in this context?
Meaning the gritty, uncomfortable, psychological heavy lifting. Shadow work is looking in the mirror and admitting, I can be incredibly selfish sometimes, or I have a desperate need to control the people around me.
Right. The stuff nobody wants to do.
Exactly. It requires enduring small daily humiliations to grow. So to avoid that, they create the sacred alibi. Let me offer an analogy here. Think of it like a claim of diplomatic immunity.
Okay, I am listening.
If a foreign diplomat parks their car in a red zone, like right in front of a fire hydrant, they aren't maliciously trying to ruin the city's infrastructure.
Well, no.
They just don't want a parking ticket. And they have this flag they can wrap themselves in that says the local rules, the rules for the little people, do not apply to them.
I see what you're saying, but
Just a person wearing the sacred alibi is wrapping themselves in a higher cosmology, specifically so their interpersonal traffic violations can no longer be prosecuted by ordinary mortals.
their small errors, their rudeness.
Right. Their need to apologize, it is an avoidance strategy. They want the crown of enlightenment without the unglamorous labor of earning it.
I am sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are severely minimizing the nature of this ignorance by comparing it to someone dodging a parking ticket.
Am I?
Yes. We have to draw a very sharp line between simple not knowing and the armed ignorance of the sacred alibi.
What's the mechanical difference? I mean, ignorance is ignorance.
No, simple not knowing is humble. It says, I don't know yet, and it stays open to being taught. It is receptive.
Okay, fair.
The ignorance of the sacred alibi is a refusal. It is a quiet, unconscious decision to completely stop taking in any information that would complicate their own self-narrative. And here is where it becomes dangerous. Ignorance armed with just enough spiritual vocabulary to sound like insight does exponentially more damage than ignorance that still knows its own name.
Give me a practical example of that. What does that damage look like in the real world?
Let's use a very real-world hypothetical. Imagine a student in a yoga studio or a member of a spiritual community goes to their teacher with a completely valid boundary-related complaint.
Like the teacher was inappropriately demanding of their time or something?
Exactly. A normal person would say, I am sorry, I overstepped. But the person with the sacred alibi, they smile benignly and say, I feel like you are projecting your unhealed trauma onto me right now. Your complaint is just lower vibrational energy.
Oof. Yeah, that is a classic deflection.
But do you see the mechanic of it? This isn't just someone avoiding a parking ticket. This is someone using the fluent, beautiful language of surrender and devotion to sound absolutely confident about someone else's inner life.
Wow.
They're gaslighting that student, telling them their valid feelings are just a lower level of consciousness without ever asking them a single genuine question. That is weaponized ignorance.
I see why you think that is inherently offensive, but let me give you a different perspective on why that gaslighting actually happens.
Because they want power?
No, the reason that teacher stops taking in information, the reason they pull that projection card is precisely because their defense mechanism requires total structural integrity to work.
Structural integrity?
Think about the architecture of their ego. A normal person can be wrong, right? But a goddess or an enlightened master cannot be wrong. As far as most rooms are concerned, you don't correct the divine.
Right, people are intimidated by the vocabulary.
Exactly. The moment this person fuses their fragile self-image with this cosmic identity, the criticism stops arriving. People won't risk arguing with them.
They just back down.
Yeah, so the silence in the room gets mistaken for agreement, and that agreement gets mistaken for proof of their enlightenment. They become completely trapped inside their own armor.
That's a very generous reading.
But it's true. That vocabulary, projection, ego, lower vibrations, it isn't a sword they sharpened with the intent to go out and attack innocent students. It is literally the only language their defense mechanism understands how to process. They are neutralizing incoming threats to a self-esteem that is hanging by a thread.
That is a compelling explanation of their internal architecture, sure. But we have to look at the actual interpersonal impact. How does this borrowed authority manifest when the rubber meets the road in relationships?
All right, how does it?
There are 4 very ordinary moments that serve as highly reliable tests to differentiate real, earned devotion from this counterfeit armor.
Okay, let's walk through them.
Look at the first test, how they react when they are simply told no.
Okay.
Let's say our supposed guru wants a prime speaking slot at a wellness retreat, and the organizer says no, that slot is filled. A normal person feels disappointment.
Right. It's a bummer.
But the counterfeit treats that as a small act of war. They reclassify the organizer as an enemy of the light, or they claim the entire event is fundamentally misaligned with the universe.
That's quite the escalation.
It is. That is not just a fragile ego protecting itself. That is the annihilation of another person's autonomy. They cannot tolerate a world where they do not get their way.
And the second test?
How they treat a person who cannot do absolutely anything to elevate their status.
Like an assistant or a barista?
Exactly. A stranger in the hallway. The counterfeit treats everyone who doesn't matter to their audience as furniture. Literally just stage props. They save all their warmth and radiant spiritual energy for the wealthy patrons and the influencers who can elevate them. This proves the alibi is fundamentally about power and self-inflation. The practitioner views themselves as a sovereign being running their own personal cosmology in parallel to reality, while the rest of us are just scenery.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning.
Really? Why not?
Because you are interpreting all of this through a lens of intentional, calculated malice. If we really look at how this disrespect manifests, it rarely looks like classic cruelty. Far more often, it looks like inattention.
Inattention? Come on, treating someone like a prop is inattentive?
Yes, mechanically speaking, it is. They aren't asking questions, they aren't noticing the barista's humanity. But why? Because as the third test reveals, they have built a belief system with absolutely no exit doors.
Meaning what?
Every possible outcome, including someone else's plain visible hurt, gets folded back in as further proof of their own specialness. If you critique them, you are testing their faith or giving them an opportunity to practice forgiveness.
Right, they spin it.
All roads lead back to them being the protagonist of the universe. They aren't treating the assistant as furniture because they are cruel, tyrannical overlords. They are doing it because they are entirely consumed by the exhausting 24/7 performance of maintaining their own cosmic alibi. It takes all their energy.
But the result is the exact same. The assistant is still demeaned.
But the motive matters. It's a desperate reach to end the discomfort of ambiguity. Which brings up the fourth test you see with these individuals, how quickly they reach for a cosmic explanation for a mundane problem.
Oh, I see this all the time.
Right? If they have a minor conflict with a friend, they don't say, "We had a misunderstanding." They say, "It's a karmic contract from a past life," or "It's a generational curse."
Yes.
They reach for destiny, anything, to end the ambiguity of just being two flawed humans who miscommunicated. That is the behavior of someone terrified of uncertainty, not a malicious conqueror.
But you cannot separate the motive from the staggering level of entitlement it produces.
I don't think I am.
You are, though. The gravity around their ego stays exactly where it always was, only their vocabulary changed. Whether the root is fear or not, the manifestation is a person who becomes completely, terrifyingly unreachable.
Well, yeah.
They take offense at the drop of a hat, they refuse to apologize, and they are infinitely more interested in being recognized as spiritual than in actually just being kind.
I completely agree. They are avoiding accountability.
Right? And real devotion, true spiritual practice, is supposed to shrink the ego. But this counterfeit version inflates the ego to the size of a blimp and then has the audacity to call that inflation growth.
It is definitely a distortion.
If we only focus on their underlying fear, we are excusing the absolute wreckage they cause in the lives of the people they treat as scenery. A god or goddess does not need defending by a human being who's just using their name to avoid defending your own bad conduct. They are actively hijacking the sacred to avoid being held accountable.
Okay, let's talk about the sacred itself, because I think to resolve this friction between our views, we need to look at what actual devotion looks like. Let's take the sacred feminine. Figures like Kali, Isis, or Parvati.
Yes, the goddess archetypes, the ones they love to co-opt.
Exactly. But for the sake of our listeners who might not be steeped in theology, we need to understand that deities like Kali are not gentle, comforting grandmother figures.
Not at all.
In Hindu tradition, Kali is a fierce, formidable expression of time, creation, and destruction. She is often depicted wearing a necklace of severed heads, and those heads represent the destruction of the human ego.
Wow. Yeah.
The true instruction of these deities was never meant to be armor. The names of the divine are not a costume you put on to demand special treatment at a coffee shop.
No, they are instructions for dismantling yourself.
Precisely. And the ultimate instruction of real devotion is to become porous enough to be touched by what's actually true. Setting down the shield isn't about suddenly becoming exposed and defenseless.
It's about not needing the shield.
Yes, it is about the profound realization that you no longer need a God's name to survive being seen clearly by another person. And this, to me, completely validates the fear-based thesis.
How so?
The entire massive structure of the sacred alibi was built for one purpose: to survive being seen. Once the person realizes they can be told they are wrong, they can be ordinary, and they will still survive it, the armor drops. The underlying fear is resolved.
I agree that the outcome of real devotion is becoming porous, but I have to emphasize the immense cost of that process. Real devotion requires the exact things the sacred alibi is intricately designed to avoid.
Right.
It demands those small humiliations. It demands the slow, painful unlearning of your own absolute certainty. And most importantly, it demands a radical change in your behavior toward other people.
It forces you to actually engage with the scenery.
Exactly. There is a definitive metric for this. The only trustworthy measure of any spiritual force you invoke is the tenderness it produces in you toward people who cannot possibly repay it.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
If your spirituality doesn't make you kinder to the person ringing up your groceries, it is entirely counterfeit. A shield that never lowers was never protecting the sacred. It was only ever protecting the terrified little person hiding behind it. And it leaves us with a very stark conclusion about this behavior. It makes a person utterly unreachable, and then it calls that unreachable holiness. That is a profound deception, and it requires a staggering degree of self-centeredness to maintain it, because real reverence makes a person easier to reach, not harder.
It really is a striking dichotomy. As we pull these threads together, I think my position holds that we are looking at a deeply compassionate yet undeniably rigorous diagnosis of a universal human temptation.
Sure.
Under enough pressure, in a moment of deep insecurity, we are all capable of reaching for something larger than ourselves just to feel solid. The sacred alibi is fundamentally a tailored costume designed to hide our most profound human fears.
The fear of being ordinary.
The fear of being ordinary, the fear of being wrong, and the desperate fear that our unadorned, messy selves are not enough to be loved. The ultimate tragedy of wearing all that armor is that it protects the wearer from the very things that could actually heal them.
ambiguity, vulnerability, and genuine human connection.
And my summary is that while we can acknowledge that fear exists, we must view this primarily as a stark, unflinching warning about how spiritual vocabulary can be hijacked.
Hijacked, yeah.
It shows how the refusal to learn and the refusal to be accountable can be transformed into a bludgeon. When self-centeredness becomes fluent in secret language, it allows individuals to elevate themselves into a sovereign universe where other human beings are stripped of their reality.
It's a dangerous path.
It is a cautionary tale about how easily the human ego can masquerade as enlightenment, inflicting deep interpersonal harm while simultaneously demanding to be worshipped.
Yet, despite our different angles on the primary driver here, whether it's the shield of fear or the sword of self-centeredness, it seems we both find deep agreement on the ultimate standard for truth. Real reverence ultimately makes a person softer.
Yes.
It makes them easier to reach, and it makes them porous to the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable.
Precisely. The true measure of enlightenment isn't the eloquence of your spiritual vocabulary or how many retreats you have led. It is the quiet, unwitnessed tenderness you show to those who have absolutely no power to reward you for it.
Right.
That requires the slow, highly unglamorous practice of actually changing your behavior. And that is infinitely harder than just putting on a costume.
There is certainly so much more to uncover in how this dynamic plays out across different spiritual traditions, and honestly, in the mundane interactions of our everyday lives. But it leaves us right back where we started, looking at that heavy, impenetrable suit of medieval armor in the middle of a coffee shop.
Quite the metaphor.
The next time you see someone wearing it, you have to ask yourself, are they bracing for a war that isn't actually happening? Or are they just terrified that you might finally see the deeply ordinary, fallible human being hiding underneath?